And welcome to the Benton Church of Christ Wednesday night meeting. So glad to see each of you come out on this somewhat dreary evening to study God's Word. Have several announcements tonight. Those in need of prayers. There will be a memorial service for Lexi McCarty. That's the niece of Jane Hines. Will be on Saturday. Service following at Jennifer Terrell will be having surgery in Metropolis. Please keep her in your prayers. Jerry Waldrop will be having outpatient surgery on November 20th. Spent a few days in the hospital last week and is feeling better, but still needs our prayers and encouragement. In way of general announcements, Wednesday night, November 22nd, the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving, we will only have a devotional that night. No class. And due to Thanksgiving, the church office will be closed on Thursday and Friday, the 23rd and 24th. Harvest Sunday is this Sunday, November 19th. We will be collecting food to provide holiday meals for those who are in need. Please bring items such as canned vegetables, green beans, corn, sweet potatoes, macaroni and cheese, stuffing mix, cornmeal, gravy mix, instant potatoes, cranberry sauce, mixed fruit, pie fillings, etc. And Harvest Sunday. And after the Sunday morning Bible class, please help the youth group. There will be a youth breakfast for 9 a.m. on November 16th. Yep, that's tomorrow. At Four Little Pigs, 9th through 12th graders. At anyone should need a ride to school. The Sunshine Youth Rally Intrigued will be November 17th and 18th. There will be a meeting tonight after class in the youth classroom for anyone going. After our prayer, Nathan Pirtle, and our speaker will be Jared Morgan. Let's go to God in prayer. Today that you have blessed us for each member here, for our eldership, dear God, and for our teachers and ministers and deacons, and for each and every member. And we thank you for this opportunity we have to assemble together and to fellowship one your word, dear God, to study for our lives. Dear God, please be with us this hour and help us to do all things pleasing your sight. Please forgive us where we fail you. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen.
And 24, 924. We'll sing 538, 538. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand, all other ground is sinking sand. When darkness veils his lovely face, I rest on his high and stormy gale. My anchor holds within the veil. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand, all other ground is sinking sand. When he shall come with trumpet sound, oh, may I then in him be found. Alone, far less to stand before the throne. On and all other ground is sinking sand, all other ground is sinking sand.
Part of the devotional tonight, we'll be reading from the John chapter 9, and I'm actually going to read the chapter, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. I was giving Aaron Lyles last week a hard time for going long, but I may do the same thing tonight, so I'll try not to be too terrible about it. As we look at John chapter 9, one of the themes that Jesus is the difference in the physical and the spiritual. And when John wrote his gospel, he limited the number of miracles he focused on to those that he could really show. That we see in John gives them salt. It's somewhat of a symbol and an irony sees than it is about the physical blind man being healed. So as we read this passage, a man blind from birth, and his disciples ask him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his?" Jesus answered, "It was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one the light of blood with the saliva. Oh, went and he washed and he came back seeing." The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar, some said, "It is he." Others said, "I'm the man." So they said to him, "Then how?" A man called Jesus made mud and anointed my eyes and said to me, "Go to Siloam and wash." So I went and washed and received my sight. They said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I do not." Siri just kicked on my phone. Sorry about that. They brought to the Pharisee mud and opened his eyes. So the Pharisees again asked him how he'd received his sight. And some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a man who is a sinner do such signs?" And there was a division among them. So they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him since he has opened your eyes?" He said, "The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, 'Is this your son who you say was born?' Parents answered, 'We know that sees, we do not know, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him, he's of age, he will speak for himself.' And his parents said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone should confess Jesus to be Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, 'He's of age, ask him.' So for the second time they called the man who had been blind and said to him, 'Give glory to God, we know that this man is a sinner.' He answered, 'Whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know, though, is that I was blind, now I see.' They said to him, 'What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?' He answered them, 'I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?' And they reviled him, saying, 'You are his disciple, but we are disciples. But as for this man, we do not know where he comes from.' The man answered, 'Why, this is an amazing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listens to him. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing.' They answered him, 'You were born in utter sin, and you would teach us.' And they cast him out. Jesus heard they had cast him out, and having found him, he said, 'Do you believe in the Son of Man?' He answered, 'And who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?' Jesus said to him, 'You have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you.' He said, 'Lord, I believe,' and he worshipped him. Jesus said, 'For judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind.' Some of the Pharisees near him heard these things and said to him, 'Are we also blind?' Jesus said to them, 'If you were blind, you would have no guilt, but now that you say, we see, your guilt remains.'" So as we look at this passage, and it's the chapter 9 of John, one of the miracles that John focused on, you have a couple of things I want to note. It's a great irony. You have the Pharisees, who are the spiritual leaders of the day, the leaders in the church, the leaders in the synagogue, the religious titans, most popular, well-known, seeking political power if they don't have it already. And they're totally and utterly blind and closed to Jesus' message because he does not fit inside their predetermined box of what God should do. God should not heal somebody on the Sabbath. That was a problem for them. They had in great detail determined what could and couldn't be done on the Sabbath, and healing was not something that was okay. So when God's own Son comes and heals a man born blind, they got a problem with it instead of accepting it. And then you look at the guy who's born blind, who's been a beggar his whole life. He suffered, and his response was very simple. I couldn't see. He healed me. He's obviously speaking for God, and he accepted. So in this lesson for us as the spiritual of our community, the key for us is to make sure we have perceptions and that we're paying more attention to the spiritual world and the spiritual truth that we see in Scripture and around us, and not to fall into the trap. That great illustration in this passage of what Isaiah said, or what God changed his call and his vision of the Lord, seeing that they cannot see and hearing that they cannot hear. The faith of the blind man is simple. It's a response to God's work in his life, and the lack of faith on the part of the Pharisees was because they had their own idea of what God should do and what he could and couldn't do and how he should and shouldn't work. So for us, the lesson is to have a simple faith, an open heart, to seek God and accept Him when we see it. And while we're not going to see miraculous works like this in our day, we do know that this world is very good at wearing people down and hurting people. And we should be open to teaching them God's truth and accepting them and loving them as Jesus did this blind man. If there's anything we can do for you tonight, please come forward as we stand and sing.
You're dismissed.
our songs, or as we get to studying our psalm, sometimes we use alliteration, and sometimes we use onomatopoeias, sometimes we use, thank you. Different deals to make our voice sound like this or that or whatever else. And the psalm we're studying tonight works that way. And so as introduction, I want us to sing these songs to kind of show us how we do that sometimes. You'll notice as we sing Ring Out the Message, the guys will be singing Ring, or I guess really everybody but the guys will be singing Ring, and it's kind of sounding like a bell as it goes along, and it's a literary device, but anyway, you'll see it as we get to the psalm. All right? Key of E, E flat. There's a message true and glad for the sinful and the sad. Ring it out, ring it out. It will give them courage new, it will help them to be true. Ring it out, ring it out, ring out the word o'er land and sea. Still far from Jesus, many live in sin and doubt. Ring out the news that makes men free, to all the lost of every nation. Bring it out. Sin and doubt to sweep away, till shall dawn a better day. Ring it out, bring it out, till the sinful world be won for Jehovah's mighty Son. Ring it out, ring it out, ring out the word o'er land and sea. Still far from Jesus, many live in sin and ring out the news, make me to all the lost of every nation. Bring it out. Nothing like singing on the microphone and needing a choke. All right, 189. Now, you saw where we said ring quite a few times, sound like a bell, sort of. Now we're going to look at the other way in which this psalm works. And what we're going to see with this psalm that we're about to do, excuse me, it starts with the letter T, tau, that we see in Hebrew, and of course, we're all Hebrew scholars. But you'll notice as it starts off the psalm, every other syllable is a real hard thing. And so what it's going to sound like as we start, not this song, but the psalm, it hits real hard, so it feels like you're in a big storm, and then it's about every fourth word, and at the end of the psalm, it's smooth and quiet. Now, we don't see that because we don't speak Hebrew. We're not going to run across that and see that necessarily, but you're going to see it in the word. There's something in the Bible about bringing somebody. It's not a Samaritan you bring water to. A good guy if you bring water. 189. Master high, the sky is o'ershadowed with blackness, no shelter or help is nigh. Carest thou not that we perish? How can thou lie asleep? With each moment so madly is threatening a grave in the angry deep. The winds in no way shall obey thy will. Peace be still. Whether the wrath of the storm-tossed sea, or demons or men or whatever it be, no water can swallow the ship where lies the mass. They all shall sweetly obey thy will. Peace be still, peace be still. They all shall sweetly obey thy will. Peace, peace, be still. See how the chorus is written to sound like a storm going up and then going down? Okay. Third verse.
Master, the terror is over, the elements sweetly rest. The sun in the calm lake is mirrored on heavens within my breast. Linger, O blessed Redeemer, leave me alone no more. And with joy I shall make and rest on that bliss. I'll obey thy will. Peace be still. Whether the wrath of the storm-tossed sea or demon torment or whatever it be, no water can the master of ocean and earth and skies. They all shall sweetly obey thy will. Peace be still. Obey thy will. Okay, Psalm 13. Psalm 13. Now, I got to admit, as I was working on this, I guess it was 2 weeks ago, I actually wanted to skip this psalm because I like Psalm 14 so much. And I thought, I'm going to skip and go to Psalm 14. Then I thought, well, let's go ahead and keep going in the direction we're going. We'll cover Psalm 13. And once I started getting into it, I really got where I like this psalm a lot. But you're going to notice that phrase right there, how long, O Lord? Now, in the Hebrew, you got 4 T's there, so it sounds like a storm coming across. It's, you ever notice, like if you have a microphone and somebody uses the letter P a lot of times, it makes the microphone pop? You're old enough to remember those old microphones that used to pop a lot? Well, preachers notice that a little bit more than other people, I guess. But that's what you're going to run into and hit over and over. Let's go ahead and read it. It's a short psalm, so it will not take us long at all to read. Psalm 13. All right. How long, O Lord, how long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart daily? How long will my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and hear me, O Lord my God. Enlighten my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death, lest my enemies say I have prevailed against him, lest those who trouble me rejoice when I am moved. But I have trusted in your mercy. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully to me. All right. So, quick 6 verses. So, it's not a lot to it, but it's still pretty powerful. Notice, once again, that harsh term, which we don't see in our language necessarily, but it's happening in the Hebrew. For us, you see a question repeated over and over, right? How long? You ever notice? Sometimes when you're going through a difficult time, it seems a lot longer than it really is. Has that ever happened to you very much? You know, the doctor says, hey, you need to have 20 minutes of hard exercise. So you get out there and you work and work and work and work and work, and you're going with everything you've got, and you've given it everything you have, and then you look at your clock and you've gone for 1 minute, 30 seconds. You're like, oh, right? Sometimes when you're grieving, you think, oh, it's going to be over quick, and it seems like the time is moving so very slowly. And sometimes we expect in our fast food culture, when we need God to answer our prayers, we need things to be changed, we need a new life, and we expect God to be able to do that, and we send that prayer up, and then we wait, and nothing happens yet. Because God doesn't always work on our time. And so what you see with David is he's asking over and over. He's asking in 4 ways. We can see 3 of them in verses 1 especially. How long? He feels like God has absolutely forgotten. It's like you're hiding your face from me. Think of a young mother, and you got a 2-year-old who wants a snack, right? And then the 2-year-old needs to go to the bathroom, right? And then the 2-year-old needs to go here, needs to go there, or whatever else. And a lot of times young mothers will finally want to just hide, and so they'll say, I'm going to be in the bathroom, and they shut the bathroom door, and then you see fingers under the bathroom door. And you see that they just cannot be away, and they've just got to be around, and they've just got to be in that presence. And a mother may say, how long? Sometimes we feel like the kid because we feel like God maybe is wanting to hide from us and not there. And you're just thinking, God, where are you? How long are you going to hide? When is it you're going to come and help me?
You see where they're just absolutely frustrated to despair. How long shall I take counsel in my soul? In other words, how long is the only person that I have to talk to myself? Why am I so lonely? Why do you not have somebody in my life who I can share my problems with, who I can engage in my difficulties, who can actually understand me? The only person I have to counsel with me is what David is saying here. Nobody seems to care about him. And he says beyond that, he has sorrow every day in his heart. He needs God to be there, but he feels like God isn't. Now he goes on and he says, I'm fallen in humiliation. The enemies are rejoicing. They're exalting. They are doing a touchdown victory dance over me. And all these things are going on. And so David starts off saying, God, where are you? Where are you in this moment? Where are you at this time? Why is everything falling apart and it seems like nobody cares? Why are these things happening? So that's the first part. Now, the next part we see in the next two verses. Consider and hear me, O Lord my God, enlighten my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. Lest my enemies say I have prevailed against him, lest those who trouble me rejoice when I have been moved. In other words, verse 3, God, listen to me. Help me. Be there for me. Don't leave me alone when I'm here. This idea of enlighten, the original language, goes back to the idea of give life. Put life back into my heart. Put life back into who I am. Think as you get older about how suddenly you're not able to do the things you used to be able to do. Has that happened to anybody yet? Maybe a little bit. You know, the things that used to be so easy, they're not quite as easy anymore. They're not quite as simple anymore. Sometimes we want to climb up on the roof and still do stuff, and guess what? We're not supposed to do that anymore, right? Things like that. Well, go ahead and look over in Ecclesiastes 12. A lot of times when we do Ecclesiastes, especially chapter 12, we spend a little bit more time on the end of it where we're talking about the whole duty of man. But I like how he describes getting old here. It's not a biography for me yet. But notice the ways that he describes getting old. He says in verse 1, this is the Kuloth or the preacher, or we know him as Solomon. He says, remember now the Creator in the days of your youth, okay? Before the difficult days come and the years draw near when you say, all right, I have no pleasure in them. You ever notice how sometimes you get older, the things that used to be so much fun when you were a teenager, they're not quite as fun anymore. They're not quite as great. Verse 2, while the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are not darkened, and the clouds do not return after the rain. You ever notice as you get older, your eyesight starts to go away? You're not able to see things as clearly as you used to be able to see them. And you got to wear these little critters, right? In the day when the keepers of the house tremble, the strong men bow down, when the grinders cease and they are few, and when those that look through the windows grow dim. You ever notice how some people will have what's called sunset? Sometimes as you get older, what's it called? Sundowners. You get older, and it gets scary at night. You know, your mind gets to wondering about things that could happen, things that are going on, and all this stuff that's happening in life. You go on, when the doors are shut in the street, the sound of grinding is low. When one rises at the sound of the bird, and the daughters of music are brought low. You see the grinding is slowing down. You're not able to work the way you used to be able to work. You're not able to accomplish the things that you used to be able to accomplish. And they are afraid, verse 5, of height, and the terrors in the way. When the almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper is a burden, and desire falls. For man goes to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the street. Okay, so you see there once again the sundowners at the beginning. The almond tree blossoms, grasshopper is a burden. That's talking about the beginning of the harvest when things are planted and things such as that. And he says at that point, you get ready for the eternal home. You start going to, at the end of verse 5, you start going to funerals. First of all, to these older people that you knew while you're growing up. Later, sometimes, as people in your family. Later, sometimes, it's actually friends that you were friends with, and you're suddenly having to go to their funerals, right? I remember when I was done with college, my dad was in pretty bad health. Mom wasn't in great health, but I used to call him a lot. You know, we'd talk back and forth on the phone and such. And what Mom and Dad seemed to do for fun back at that time is they went to the doctor. I don't know if it was fun, but it seemed like they were going to a doctor every day, or they went to funerals. Part of the beauty of living in West Texas is a lot of Spanish people there, right? Spanish people feed you at their weddings, and Spanish people feed you at their funerals. So you want to know a lot of Spanish people, right? Well, they were going to not a lot of weddings, they're going to a lot of funerals all the time. And sometimes as we get older, we find ourselves at a funeral more often. Remember your Creator before the silver cord is loosed, before the golden bowl is broken. The pitcher is shattered at the fountain, and the wheel is broken at the well. That's talking about different parts of our body. We won't go into each part of the body that that's talking about. But you ever notice that sometimes the body doesn't work as well as it used to? Certain parts of it? Find yourself not able to eat certain things after 6 o'clock maybe at night or 7 o'clock at night. Find yourself going to bed a little bit earlier, so it doesn't matter if you don't eat after 8 o'clock at night, right? Sometimes you find yourself, with this function or that function or whatever else it may be. He says, so when the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the Spirit who gave the Lord will go to God. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, all is vanity. All right, so why does Solomon describe all that sort of stuff as he goes through there? He says, recognize what's going to happen when you get older. Now, we don't think we're going to get older. We always feel like we're going to be just like we are right now. But when is it best to obey God? Is it best to plan in the future and say, man, when I get married, I'm going to obey God, or when I have children, I'm going to obey God, or when the children are finally out of the house and I've got time, I'm going to obey God, or when I retire and I have nothing to do, then I'll be doing this for God. When's the best time to plan for it? Yeah. The younger you are, the easier it will be to do it. And the earlier you make the decision to change your life, the earlier you make the decision to live right, the easier it will be able to accomplish. Till tomorrow, because you don't know. Let's look at it. You see where this man here, give me life. See the things that are going on with vindication. He was afraid that they would reject him anymore. And so as we go through that, I have trusted in your mercy. My heart shall, as happening there in verse 5. Beginning in the end of the psalm, we're headed right to our storm of faith. And you've got to have faith. Now, since Martin Luther, 500 years ago, came along onto the scene, we have been queasy about faith and exactly what we mean by faith. Because Luther started what's called the Protestant Reformation, protesting against the church of his day, right? And what he said was, instead of buying indulgences, instead of saying, okay, if I do enough good works, I'll stay out of hell, Luther said, that's not how it works. You have to believe. And if you believe only, then you're saved, because it's faith that saves you. Now, if you look at the pendulum, the church of his day was over here saying, hey, you'll earn your way to heaven. And Luther went the other direction and said, no, you're saved by faith alone. Where's the correct spot for that pendulum to be? Right there. Jesus said something like, believe and be baptized, right? There is a belief, a faith, and there's also action. Those two work together. But since we focus on that so much and we spend so much, but you are saved by faith working through love, faith to make. Something your spouse can see. Today, we were going along, we were talking about atheism, as you believe there's no God, if a God exists. I was telling them I have a different category, and it's not atheism, it's not agnosticism. I'm a preacher, so eventually I'll figure out how to start it with A. I said it's just selfishism, all right? And this is what I mean by selfishism. God can exist, God may exist, God probably exists, but these people are going to say, but I'm still going to do whatever I'm going to do, and God's just got to deal with it. Through the symptoms, or they haven't thought through, they just want to do whatever it is that makes them happy. They just want to go through and live. They'll come to church because their family goes to church, because people think they belong at church, and they feel guilty if they're. God doesn't really control anything. The hearts of me, and shocked at the percentage of people who are not to the agnosticism, but to that selfishism. There may not be there, but I'm going to become. And that's life where we've got to decide, I'm going to trust God. Now, David is in this situation, and he's crying out, oh God, how long will you let this? And how long will you let that? And he comes back here, and I trust in you. Now, we continue along. If you have an older translation, you're going to see that word mercy or loving kindness. A super busy word in the Old Testament. It's the Old Testament word for grace, is what we usually call it. It's the Hebrew word hesed, H-E-S-E-D. And it's loving kindness or it's mercy. We had, when the king translated it, some guys translated it mercy, translated different ways, right? Kind of like how in the New Testament from 1 Corinthians 13, this direction, it is charity, and from this direction, it is love. It's because you had different people translating it back in the day when the King James was written. And sometimes it's not super consistent. But you see this word hesed, or loving kindness. And it is the idea of what God has done for Israel. Israel was not the biggest nation, not the strongest nation, certainly not the most moral nation. But God chose Israel and said, you are mine. He saw Abraham, and he called Abraham out and said, Abraham, you belong to me. Abraham's faith sometimes was you. Same thing with slavery. Same thing with Israel and the judges. Love you, and I'm going to take care of you. That's that idea of hesed. Now, in the New Testament, a lot of times we use the word grace, right? Grace is unmerited favor. God being nice to me even when I don't deserve it. Okay? What David is saying here is, God, I have full faith, full trust that you're going to treat me special, that you love me, and that you will take care of me. Okay? Deep thought there when you start applying it to life. Because sometimes we feel awfully lonely. And sometimes things aren't working out the way they should. But you see that idea of loving kindness right there. And so David says, I will rejoice in your salvation. Even before he's saved, what's David doing? He's rejoicing. He says, I will rejoice in your salvation. All right, so bring all that together, okay? First of all, you see God. And we know God loves us. We know God is all-powerful, and we know that God will take care of us. Yes, he's taking care of our sins by sending his son to die on a cross, but it's even more deep than that. He knows everything about us, and he still loves us. And God has made a promise to take care of us. But the question is, do you trust him enough to let him operate in your life? Do you trust him enough to be like Abraham? Abraham showed God's power and love by his willingness to sacrifice his only begotten son, right? Genesis 22. But unless Abraham had shown that faith, God could not have shown his love. Well, in my life and in your life, are you showing the faith where God can be glorified by his good work? By how God can be glorified in his power. And that faith works in our families, that faith works in our work, that faith works in our church, that faith works in our every single daily life, and that we let God be in charge of us and let God control us in everything that we do. In Hebrew thought, the loving kindness that hesed or mercy in this translation refers to that story of God's grace to Israel. Now, we know what's happened in the past. We see how God is taking care of Israel. Romans 15:4 says, those things which are written in the past were written for our learning, that we, through the patience and comfort of the Scriptures, might have hope. We know the past and that God sent his Son to die for us so that we can be saved. But you have to look at the evidence of the past in order to have faith for the present and faith for the future. What are some things that you know happen now because they've happened in the past? Okay, if the Lord doesn't return, if the Lord tarries, what's going to happen tomorrow about 5:30 a.m.? The sun's going to come up, right? Now, for some of us, we don't see that part, right? We just open it up, and man, that sun's almost at midday already. Too many of us have to see the sunrise. Okay? Well, how do you know at 5:30 tomorrow the sun's going to come up unless the Lord returns? It always has, right? It always has. Absolutely. And I know don't go outside to feed my chickens wearing anything brown because people are shooting all around here, right? Okay? In a lot of things, you know what's going to happen in the future because you can read the past. Right here, what David is saying is he's saying, I'm going to trust in your mercy because I've seen how you've always taken care of me, and because of that, I have trust in that you will take care of me. That's what 1 Corinthians 15 is about, right? Christ is the first fruit of salvation. We may say, that's kind of weird. That's a little deeper than where I'm used to going. But what Paul is saying there by inspiration is if God is faithful enough to raise Jesus, he's going to raise us as well, too. Now, we don't know what our bodies are going to look like. That's what the point of 42 on there in 1 Corinthians 15 is. He says you plant something, something totally different comes up, right? The mortal becomes immortal. That which is carnal becomes spiritual, right? What are we going to look like in heaven? Guess what John says? 1 John chapter 3, verse 2. Brethren, we don't know what our bodies will look like, but we do know this. We're going to look just like Jesus. And that is absolutely enough. All right? So you see there, as we look at this, the idea of looking in the past so that you have faith in the future. All right? Does that make sense? Maybe? Sort of? All right. So as he ends here in verse 6, I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. Now, contrast verse 6 with what you just saw in verses 1 and 2. All right? Verses 1 and 2, what's the question he keeps asking? How long is this going to happen? God, why are you hiding your face? God, why are all these things happening? Why is the enemy going to be able to destroy me? Why is all this going on? And now in verse 6, suddenly he says, I'm going to sing. Because you know what? God is taking care of me, and God is seeing me through everything that I face. And everything I face, he is going to take care of me. And so because of that, I rejoice. That sounds kind of funny for somebody who just a few verses earlier was talking totally different, right? And so that brings us to our last slide, okay? And this is what we're talking about. Think of a storm coming. We just sang, Master, the tempest is raging. And as you look at the chorus, the winds and the waves shall obey thy will. It's real quiet and everything. And then weather the wrath of the storm till sea. And it starts getting louder and louder till you get up there to that high note. And then you go back down. And so when you actually have somebody who knows what they're doing and leading singing, you see that crescendo, and then you see it go back down, and it feels like you're sitting there on the horizon. You see this huge storm and the lightning and the thunder and sometimes even the hail, and then you see it pass away. That's how the psalm is written. In the first two verses, you see it with the enunciation of the Hebrew, but we see it in the fierce, hard-hitting questions. Here you are in the middle of the storm. How long, Lord? How long are you going to let this happen? How long are these things going to go on? How long will you let the enemies win? And then there's a glimmer. A little bit of sunshine comes through some of those clouds, and suddenly you start thinking about the loving kindness of God. And you see the beauty that's there in the way that he takes care of you. And then that little sliver of sunlight opens up. And now it's nice and calm, and you see the beauty of everything that's around. All right, so let's think about this for a second, because I wanted to spend some time talking, and I know how well we talk in the auditorium. In this psalm, we see God clearly in verse 6. Is God around in verses 1 and 2? He is, isn't he? Okay. You remember the old poem? It was all over the place, late 70s and the 80s. Everybody had a picture of it up in their Bibles, or they had a picture of it somewhere in their house. The steps on the beach.
You remember that poem, right? Lord, I'm so angry at you. As the poem would go along, he'd say, I had all these troubles in life, and all these things were hitting me, and all these things were attacking me. And I look back, and there was only one set of steps. I was so lonely, and you just weren't anywhere around. And did anybody ever bother reading the end of it? That's when I carried you. That's where God says, that's the point at which I was carrying you. That's the reason there's only one set of steps. That's more or less the same thing that's going on here. And what we got to recognize is it's not just that God is with us when everything is good. It's not just God is with us when we're comfortable, when life makes sense, and everything else. What you see in this psalm is God is with us even when we're questioning, even in the middle of the storm, and even when none of this makes sense at all. God is absolutely still here. If you read some of the people from World War II who are in concentration camps, they have quite a bit of literature with the same idea. And what they do is the same storm analogy that we're doing tonight, but they talk about how God is in the clear sun and the sky. And what they say is, here comes a storm that's covering it and making the world dark. And, it's rocking our world with the lightning and the thunder and maybe even tornadoes, and it scares us to death. But what we've got to realize, that even when those clouds are there, guess what's still above and still in charge? Still God, isn't it? He's never left us. And God has never relinquished, boy, that was a rough word. God has never given up his power at all. He is still there for us. Now, it's easy to say, but sometimes it's hard to believe. It's easy to preach this sort of stuff, but it's a faith that's hard to acquire. But as you go up to those earlier verses, right? As we look at that idea of verse 5, you have to believe and show faith in his loving kindness that he has for us. Does that make sense? Does that work pretty good? All right. Well, good. That's all I have. Now, what do I say when I let you out early? No running in the halls. Don't make me go get your kids. All right? All right. Thank you for being here. And so that brings us to our last slide, okay? And this is what we're talking about. Think of a storm coming. We just sang, Master, the tempest is raging. And as you look at the chorus, the winds and the waves shall obey thy will. It's real quiet and everything. And then weather the wrath of the storm till sea. And it starts getting louder and louder till you get up there to that high note. And then you go back down. And so when you actually have somebody who knows what they're doing and leading singing, you see that crescendo, and then you see it go back down, and it feels like you're sitting there on the horizon. You see this huge storm and the lightning and the thunder and sometimes even the hail, and then you see it pass away.
That's how the psalm is written. In the first two verses, you see it with the enunciation of the Hebrew, but we see it in the fierce, hard-hitting questions. You know, here you are in the middle of the storm. How long, Lord? How long are you going to let this happen? How long are these things going to go on? How long will you let the enemies win? And then there's a glimmer. A little bit of sunshine comes through some of those clouds, and suddenly you start thinking about the loving kindness of God. And you see the beauty that's there in the way that he takes care of you. And then that little sliver of sunlight opens up, and now it's nice and calm, and you see the beauty of everything that's around. All right, so let's think about this for a second, because I wanted to spend some time talking, and I know how well we talk in the auditorium. In this psalm, we see God clearly in verse 6. Is God around in verses 1 and 2? He is, isn't he? Okay. You remember the old poem? It was all over the place, late 70s and the 80s. Everybody had a picture of it up in their Bibles, or they had a picture of it somewhere in their house. The steps on the beach. You remember that poem, right? Lord, I'm so angry at you. As the poem would go along, he'd say, I had all these troubles in life, and all these things were hitting me, and all these things were attacking me. And I look back, and there was only one set of steps. You know, I was so lonely, and you just weren't anywhere around. And did anybody ever bother reading the end of it? That's when I carried you. That's where God says, that's the point at which I was carrying you. That's the reason there's only one set of steps. That's more or less the same thing that's going on here. And what we got to recognize is it's not just that God is with us when everything is good. It's not just God is with us when we're comfortable, when life makes sense, and everything else. What you see in this psalm is God is with us even when we're questioning, even in the middle of the storm, and even when none of this makes sense at all. God is absolutely still here. If you read some of the people from World War II who are in concentration camps, they have quite a bit of literature with the same idea. And what they do is the same storm analogy that we're doing tonight, but they talk about how God is in the clear sun and the sky. And what they say is, here comes the storm that's covering it and making the world dark. And, you know, it's rocking our world with the lightning and the thunder and maybe even tornadoes, and it scares us to death. But what we've got to realize, that even when those clouds are there, guess what's still above and still in charge? Still God, isn't it? He's never left us. And God has never relinquished, boy, that was a rough word. God has never given up his power at all. He is still there for us. Now, it's easy to say, but sometimes it's hard to believe. It's easy to preach this sort of stuff, but it's a faith that's hard to acquire. But as you go up to those earlier verses, right? As we look at that idea of verse 5, you have to believe and show faith in his loving kindness that he has for us. Does it make sense? Does that work pretty good? All right. Well, good. That's all I have. Now, what do I say when I let you out early? No running in the halls. Don't make me go get your kids. All right? All right. Thank you for being here.